It is every parent's worst nightmare. Your child goes out one Saturday night and then vanishes off the face of the earth. This is the story of Amy St Laurent. Amy Elizabeth St Laurent was the kind of woman who would have used her savings to give a struggling young family a decent Christmas. She would fly a friend, Katie, home from Alaska for Katie's grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. She took leave of absence from work to sit by the bedside of a friend in a coma, talking for hours of the things they'd done together. She was most generous and loving and hoped for a better world. She was a hard-working professional with a great career ahead of her and a good place to live. She had been visiting a friend, Jason. He had lost his wife and she hoped to be some kind of comfort to him. But while there, she had met a man named Eric and they hit it off right away. And she'd promised to show him around Maine if he wanted to come and visit. Eric thought Amy was so cool and he booked a ticket to go and see her. He would also visit his grandmother while he was there because she lived in New York. Amy was slightly nervous about having Eric over, especially at her apartment. At the end of the day, she had not known him that long. And that night, her ex-boyfriend popped over also for a few hours too, but it was like three's a crowd. A neighbour did hear an argument between Amy and Eric on the driveway, but whatever happened, they seemed to sort it out. As on Saturday, they were checking out the area and going out for the day. Amy and Eric visited many museums. They visited bars, listened to music, and played pool. Amy was fit. She was blonde, slender, had long wavy hair, and very good looking. That night, they visited a pizza restaurant. Then they visited another bar where Amy danced and Eric stood back with a beer and watched. In 2001, the bars closed at 1 a.m. It was so busy that night. It was absolutely packed. You could barely move and there were so many people everywhere. They got chatting to a few men that were just hanging around at the time. One of them was named Jeffrey Gorman. So on October the 20th, 2001, Amy had brought this friend Eric and they were at a pool hall in the Old Port section of Portland, Maine. The two finished the night at the nearby Pavilion Club where they met up with two men. After an evening of shooting pool and dancing, the 25-year-old Amy St Laurent had suddenly vanished. But this isn't a fictional story, this is real, and Amy St Laurent was a real person. That night, she had crossed paths with a young man named Russ Gorman, a 21-year-old who prided himself on the number of women he'd slept with, a man who would not take no for an answer and grew enraged if a woman turned him down. He also carried a weapon. A few hours after this, Amy lay dead in the woods in Scarborough after being shot in the head, but nobody knew where she was. By Sunday, her family were deeply concerned. When Amy didn't show up for work the next day, her family and friends were immediately concerned. Where was Amy and who were the men that had been with her the night before? And by Monday, South Berwick Police and the Portland Police were launching their investigation into her disappearance. Her family and friends were papering the old port with posters. Although they were certain that Amy was dead, there were no witnesses, there was no visible crime scene, no weapon, and no body. So state police detectives shared the case. So according to Amy's friend Eric, he went to the bathroom around 1 a.m. But when he came back from the bathroom, she was gone. He went back to Amy's house where he was staying while he was in town, and when he woke up the next morning in his car, she was still not there. And one of the first tips police received in Amy's case was about 21-year-old Jeffrey Gorman. Now Jeffrey had been there that night. He had met Amy, and he told investigators that he met Amy that night at both the pool hall and the dance club. He said he'd invited Amy back to a party at his apartment, but that no one else besides his roommate showed up. This Gorman man said that he drove Amy back home and was back at his apartment at 2 a.m. So investigators wanted to speak to Gorman's roommate, and when they interviewed him, they got a different story. The roommate said he returned home at 3 a.m. and Gorman was nowhere to be found. and when the roommate woke up at 5 a.m, he says he saw Gorman cleaning up in the bathroom. Police also discovered that this Gorman had been pulled over on the night of Amy's disappearance at 3:14 a.m, full hour after he said he'd been home sleeping. And as the weeks ticked by, with her family longing for closure, police watched their suspect, Jeffrey Gorman, in the Old Port, fearing for other young women, as they searched and searched for Amy. On Tuesday, Russ Gorman had borrowed a shovel from his stepfather. He'd gone back to the woods where he'd left Amy's body and buried her, carefully concealing the grave by replacing the cut-away pieces of grass and then masking the whole thing, sprinkling it with pine needles. In early December, troubled by the news stories reporting that Amy had still not been found, a lieutenant with the Maine Warden Service in charge of the search and rescue for the state offered his help, and a third public safety agency became involved. And on December the 8th, a massive search and rescue effort was launched, with police from both agencies, wardens, search and rescue dogs and handlers, as well as volunteers and many SAR agencies were involved. And by mid-afternoon, a snowstorm was on the way and the searchers were losing hope. But when one grid searcher walked a tote road near the suspect's home, they spotted a live tree branch buried in the ground and noticed that the grass under his feet appeared to be disturbed. The grid search line halted. They examined the ground and found cut turf. The trained cadaver dogs hit on the spot, and Detective Danny Young came to the scene with a trowel, knelt and dug in the ground. About 20 inches down, they found the grey sweatshirt material Amy St Laurent had worn, a grey sweatshirt the night she had disappeared. The medical examiner and a forensic anthropologist were called, and Amy was found on the 8th of December 2001 near Jeffrey Gorman's mother's home in Scarborough, Maine. And a 20-minute phone call he had made to his mother, Jeffrey had admitted to killing Amy and also gave details of the crime. Jeffrey Gorman was arrested. He was convicted of the murder of Amy St Laurent and was sentenced after a week-long trial in 2003. The judge said, "Jeffrey Gorman, you're a dangerous person who had remained defiant through his incarceration and trial. You have shown absolutely no remorse for your conduct." Amy St Laurent's parents, who gave impassioned statements to the court, said afterward that the sense of relief that they were searching for is missing. No matter how many years he gets, it will never bring her back, her dad said. Amy's sister, Julie St Laurent, recalled putting up posters for her sister's picture after she disappeared and said that Mr. Gorman winked at her and harassed her during the trial. "She doesn't get a second chance, and I don't think you should either," she said. Amy St Laurent's mother, Diane, spoke of the pain of not knowing where her daughter was and packing up Amy's apartment, cancelling her telephone service and notifying family members that she was dead. "Do not dare say you are sorry to me, because I don't believe you understand the meaning of the words," she said. And at the end of her statement, she hugged a large photograph of Amy and turned so that the entire courtroom could see. "This is my daughter, and this is how I get to hold my daughter," she said, turning to stare at Jeffrey Gorman, who did not react. His mother testified to his son's admission. He's currently serving 60 years in prison. Jeffrey Gorman said, "I am Jeffrey Russ Gorman. I'm now 43 years of age. I have been in the Maine State Prison for the past 22 years. I was 21 back in 2001. I told my 2-year-old daughter, 'I love you, baby,' as I'm getting ready to go out with some friends to have fun, and I bumped into this guy who had some substance. It was cheap, and a bunch of us decided to trip that night, and I ended up meeting someone that night, and I started to trip hard and lose control of my mind. I remember bits and pieces of the nightmare. I shot and killed my victim, and I remember driving back to the party house and laying on the sofa. My mind played tricks on me. The hours passed and the trip starts to fade away, but I'm left with this feeling that something bad really happened. I got into my car and drove to the place this happened. I started peeking around the bend of the trees and I see the nightmare is real. I started to panic and didn't know what to do. I was now someone considered evil. I felt evil and I told my mother and left the state. I was quickly arrested and I've spent the first 10 years of my 60 years sentence wasting away doing nothing, always with the thoughts I'm evil and not meant for this world. I wanted to end my life so many times and I still struggle with wanting to end it. I started doing programs and after 19 years of no contact with my daughter, finally my baby's back in my life and I now have a reason to live. I want to be a good father and I beg God for forgiveness, and I wrote the family of the victim over 10 years ago begging for their forgiveness. I never knew if they received it or not, but I gave it to the caseworker. I have changed since my crime. I am no longer this broken, evil young man. I never meant to hurt anyone. I have grown and I am a good person. I can be a good father, son and brother. I can be a great member of society as well, and I need a second chance. Parole could give me a second chance to prove that I'm a good man and I would never hurt anyone ever in my life. I have done so many programs. I'm now in college and I plan on getting my master's degree. I also a service dog trainer. I have trained or helped train 4 different dogs and I've ended up with a wounded war veteran. We take 3-month-old puppies and train them daily for 17 months to do basic commands, sitting, and the most complex commands such as opening doors. These dogs end up with the men and women that have fought for this country and have been wounded doing so. I feel such self-worth and happiness doing this for people who need it. The state hasn't had parole since 1976. It's time for change. I would happily wear an ankle bracelet and GPS for the rest of my life. I won't miss this opportunity up ever. I just want some years left with my mother and my daughter. I have a lot to prove. I can be a productive part of society for the rest of my life. Parole would give me hope where there is only darkness. People who hope can become great people. We aren't evil people to be kept in a box forever. I did something so evil 20 years ago and I'm so sorry for that. And with this legislation, I have the chance to be a father. I want to be and show the world I'm a good person. I owe it to her to be a good father and show that I'm a good person. I have a lot to prove. Please bring hope back to families. Respectfully, Jeffrey Russ Gorman, Marine State Prison. I've just added at the end what Jeffrey Gorman said about that night. And the fact that he wants parole so that he can have his life back, so that he can be a good father, a brother, a son. But what about Amy St Laurent? She can no longer be a daughter, a niece, a sister. Where is Amy's life and where is Amy's family's hope? Why should you, Jeffrey Gorman, get a new life and a new start when Amy St Laurent cannot?